Now, what we're talking about here was, we live in a world of increasing uncertainty, and that's political, social, economic, and financial. And I just thought perhaps we could talk a bit around that, Andrew. You're right on the ground there with what's happening in handling persons' funds and that sort of thing. And I don't know if you would want to take over your presentation itself, but I think clients would actually like to know, you connected in various circles there. How do you see things work where they are at the moment, politically, socially, economically, and financially?
James, yeah, that's a very good question. I think we're sitting in a space that's very concerning. But to contextualize it, we are running up to the leadership elections for the ANC in December. So I think
Yes.
there's a lot of political noise at the moment. But one of the things I think that you always talk about is we've got to, in these kind of conversations, differentiate between the market fundamentals and then the sentiment. And
Yes.
I think that we're going to see a lot of choppiness in the rand over the next couple of months, just driven by sentiment around a lot of the sort of political noise and the uncertainty that is sort of very prevalent in the media at the moment. But
Yes.
on the other side of the border, equally the rest of the world isn't exactly looking that stable at the moment, because there's also in destinations. I mean, you've got the Catalan, Barcelona, and the Catalonia area of Spain that basically votes to become independent. I mean, that's potentially a really rocky sort of occurrence that's happened in the EU.
Yes.
I see that they've kind of now pulled back on that. You've got Brexit. Britain's in a very tough position at the moment with their negotiations. And then, of course, you've got Donald Trump, who's a very different type of character to any of the previous US presidents. And he's got a way of really sort of making some quite hectic statements. And
Yes.
so you've got a noisy global environment. I think what we've got to try and drill down into the South African scenario is, let's look at and understand the fundamentals. And I think I'm going to leave you more to talk about that technically.
Yes.
What I would say is that one of the fundamental drivers of the rand from a sort of a more layman's term point of view are things like what's happening in the commodity world, because the rand is a commodity currency. We're an emerging market. And in the last while, the emerging markets have been doing fairly well around the world. And so the rand, up until recently, was actually looking quite strong, considering that we recently had downgrades from most of the ratings agencies. So, drill back into those fundamentals of an emerging market. South Africa is classified as an emerging market. And what defines an emerging market is things like economic growth, a higher rate than what you'd expect in a developed economy, industrialization. And I think that's kind of one of my areas of concern, is that as an emerging market, I think that those sort of definitions are, for me, problematic, because South Africa is showing very low growth for an emerging market. I think that the sort of so-called state capture and the destruction of our state-owned enterprises and institutions is really damaging the economy. So we're a very low growth environment, which you would not expect from an emerging market. And then industrialization, I mean, that's another concern, because our industry and our strong sort of industrial sector is under threat at the moment. So I think that, look at that practically and say, is this really where you want to be invested if you already are? And how would you hedge your investments going forward, in that environment? Because if you look at a country like the UK, where I'm sitting at the moment, there's a lot of uncertainty. But the one thing that we do know is that they've got a strong political will to sort themselves out. It is as far as democracies go, one of the most established. There's rule of law. The government is run by people who are well educated. So these are the sort of things that we should really be looking at.
Yeah, if you want to ask, I mean, what are your views in going up to now ANC elections at the end of the year? What effect is that going to have going forward on whether it's whoever gets in on the economy and so on going forward? Have you got a view on that, or you've got
I,
some
I do
insight?
have a view on it. I do, and I think that unfortunately, I mean, if you go back to 2009, we were sitting in a situation where Jacob Zuma was running for president, and you speak to people in the know, and everyone said it wouldn't happen. It did happen, and I think we're living with the consequences at this stage. But it goes down to more than Jacob Zuma as a person.
Yeah.
I think what you've got to do is you've got to understand that the endemic problems that are in our government at all levels, national, provincial, and more concerningly at local level, is this corruption has become so endemic, and the capabilities of your civil service are so compromised at the moment that I don't know whether there's going to be any real impact on who becomes leader. I think whoever becomes a leader won't be Jacob Zuma. So I think the markets will look on that favorably. So I would imagine that sort of going into the end of the year and very early next year, we might see a sort of an uptick in sentiment because there's going to be a lot of positive rhetoric and whatever. So it doesn't matter who gets in, it's not going to be Jacob Zuma. But I think what will happen shortly after that is that the market's going to realize that fundamentally what has really changed. And the reality of the situation is all the areas of the economy that matter are in the hands of people who compromised. And I think that, right down into the local municipality, probably the person who cleans the dustbins and sweeps the floors is on the take. So, that for me is what's more concerning. I think one of the biggest things that would concern me in South Africa is what is the new leader of the ANC going to set in terms of their policy, in terms of education, in terms of the national health insurance, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's going to be a little bit early afterwards just to tell what's going to happen. But I think that the way the ratings agencies are looking at it is that when the budget gets presented next February, I think that's going to be a really telling time for how we get viewed as an investment destination going forward.
Yeah.
So I think that that's really going to be a trigger point that we should be looking out for. And what we're hoping is that whatever happens at the elective conference in December and the sort of following 8 weeks before the budget is that they are going to give the ratings agency some degree of comfort that we don't need to get further downgraded. So that's what we've got to hope for.
Yeah. Yeah, my own concern, Andrew, is to be open, is that, Jacob Zuma only came into power because he had support by the SSCP. They effectively dumped Mbeki and put Zuma in power. But it seems like he hasn't been doing what they've been wanting. Because the SSCP is effectively driving ANC policy, or have been over the years, and you're starting to get these things coming in with radical economic transformation and that sort of thing. And where is that going to take us?
Yeah, I think what we've got to do is we've got to look at the rhetoric versus the practicalities. And I think that in this radical economic transformation sort of discourse that's become quite popular in the media recently is obviously designed to make sure that they try and retain some support going forward. It is dangerous because, again, it's all about managing expectations. It's creating a deflection, and people are looking in the wrong places of where things have gone wrong. But the reality of the situation is that, in order to go forward in any system or any kind of belief, whether you're communist or whether you trade unionized or whatever, if you look at the tripartite lines, they really all it's a mass support base of people with very different wants and needs. And I think
Yes.
now that things are becoming difficult, those splits are becoming very apparent. And I think
Yes.
that what the ruling party are going to do is they're going to do whatever they can to try and hold that together. I don't think that's an easy job, and I think it's a very, very difficult position for any leader to be in, to try and keep Labour happy, to try and keep the Communist Party happy, to keep the old military veterans happy, to keep the ANC Youth League happy, and to keep business happy. Because at the end of the day, whatever the agenda is going forward, the finance is going to come from two sources, and that's going to be from the fiscus, and that's from taxpayers. And if you destroy or slow your economy down, your tax revenue comes under pressure. And then the other area where the government gets funding is through the international bond index, where they're borrowing money on the bond markets. And whilst we're heading for further downgrades, again, that's a revenue source that becomes very threatened.
Yes.
So behind the scenes, one has to hope that there's some advising going on where they're saying, guys, you have to look after those revenue sources, because to be able to deal with the social agenda and deliver on all the promises, you need taxpayers, and you need the bond market and the capital markets to remain intact. So I think it's getting uncomfortable, because we're 21, 22, 23 years down the line from the dawn of democracy, and the average man in the street is not feeling very happy about his life. So I think that's going to be the challenge for anybody going forward, is how do you balance the interests of all the different role players in our economy sustainably.
Yeah, because the thing is, you got a lot of social unrest, which is feeding into what some of these more radical views are they're promoting, which is very concerning to me.
It's an uncomfortable place we are at the moment, but I think to an extent we've been in these kind of positions before. The one thing that is concerning is we've never been in this position before with the economic trajectory that we're seeing currently, and at a time when the rest of the world is actually kind of turning the corner. The EU's in a fairly good growth position at the moment with economic recovery. The UK is under a bit of pressure at the moment, but coming off a good few years. And the US, things are actually starting to look positive again. So, we would like to be in a position to take advantage of that. And I think that there's a lot of sort of infighting going on at the moment, and we don't have anybody running the economy who's focusing on the economy. There's a lot of political jostling going on at the moment because people are trying to protect themselves for the future. I'm cautiously optimistic. I think that we'll find a way forward. But I do think that there's going to have to be a little bit more pain and stress before the behavior gets forced into a position where we have to face these realities and find a common solution with common ground.
I'm very concerned that you look all the elements together as to where things are heading. But next few months will certainly be an interesting ride.